"Your sister needs this opportunity," my dad said after giving my trust fund to Stepsister. I found out why he really did it. Months later, I took him to the court. I'm 20. I always thought I understood how complicated family dynamics could be, but nothing could have prepared me for the gut-wrenching reality that unfolded after my mother passed away. She had made sure I had an education fund, a safety net that would allow me to pursue my dreams of going to college. But everything changed when she was gone, and my father, the man who should have been there for me, did the unthinkable. My mom passed away when I was 14 after a brief but brutal battle with cancer. Her loss was, and still is, a wound that never quite heals. She and my dad had been together for 16 years, and their relationship, though imperfect, had always seemed solid. I used to believe they would grow old together, that nothing could shake their bond. Before she passed, my mom set up an education fund for me, combining her life insurance with their joint savings to ensure my future. It was a significant sum, more than enough to cover my college education and beyond. I never once thought that I might have to fight for that security. After her death, my dad was a shell of the man I once knew. He threw himself into work and spent the little time he had left making sure I was okay, but I could see the emptiness in his eyes. I tried to encourage him to date again, even though I wasn't sure what to expect from this new chapter of our lives. But when he met Laura and her daughter, Christine, things began to shift in ways I never anticipated. It started with small things. Dad began attending all of Christine's volleyball games but missed my debate team competitions. He'd help her with college applications during dinner, while my questions about scholarships were met with distracted, "We'll talk about it later," that never materialized. When Christine needed help with her driver's test, Dad took 3 afternoons off work to practice with her. When I asked for similar help months earlier, he'd been too busy. The accident happened on Christine's 17th birthday. They were having a big celebration at an upscale restaurant downtown. I wasn't there because I had a major debate tournament that day. On my way home, a drunk driver ran a red light and clipped my car. It wasn't serious, mostly just whiplash and some bruising, but I was scared and alone in the emergency room. I called Dad immediately. "Dad, I've been in an accident. I'm at Metro General." There was a pause, then muffled conversation in the background. I could hear Christine's party music. "Are you hurt badly?" "No, but..." "Listen, we're just about to bring out Christine's cake. Can you hang tight for a bit? I'll be there as soon as we're done here." 3 hours. That's how long I sat in that cold hospital room, waiting for my father to finish celebrating my stepsister's birthday before coming to check on his injured child. When he finally arrived, he seemed more annoyed at having his evening disrupted than concerned about my well-being. That was the moment everything crystallized for me. The man who used to check my room 3 times a night when I had a fever, who would drop everything if I so much as scraped my knee. That man was gone. In his place was someone who saw me as an inconvenience to his new family's happiness. I started pulling away after that. I stopped joining their family dinners, citing homework or debate team practice. I got a part-time job at a local cafe and picked up extra shifts whenever they planned family outings. I began researching scholarships and financial aid, knowing somehow that I couldn't count on Dad's support for college. But nothing prepared me for what happened after graduation. I found out about the trust fund transfer by accident. I was looking for a stapler in Dad's home office when I saw the papers on his desk. Legal documents with my mother's name, my name, and a sum that made my heart stop. Transfer of assets, beneficiary change, Christine's name where mine should have been. The confrontation that followed is seared into my memory. Dad tried to justify it by saying Christine's biological father had never contributed to her education, that she needed the security more than I did. Then I found out it was a lie. "You're smart," he said, as if it were a compliment. "You'll get scholarships. Christine needs this safety net." "That money was from Mom," I said, my voice shaking. "She set it aside specifically for me." "Your mother would understand," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "We're a family now. We have to support each other." "Support each other?" I laughed bitterly. "Like you supported me when I was alone in that hospital, or when you missed every single one of my debate competitions." "Don't be dramatic," he snapped. "I've provided everything you need." "No," I corrected him. "Mom provided everything I needed. She made sure I would be taken care of, and you're throwing that away for your new daughter." The words hung in the air between us, heavy with truth and accusation. Dad's face hardened, and for a moment I saw something like guilt flicker in his eyes before it was replaced by defensive anger. "The decision's been made," he said firmly. "The paperwork is already filed. Christine needs this opportunity, and as part of this family, you need to accept that." I stood there staring at this stranger wearing my father's face and felt the last thread of our relationship snap. "You're right about one thing," I said quietly. "The decision has been made, but not just by you. You've chosen your new family, and now I'm choosing to let you go." I walked out of his office that day, leaving behind not just my college fund, but any illusion that the man who raised me still existed. The father who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me through my first heartbreak, who had promised Mom he would always protect me, that man had died with her, and I was finally ready to accept it. The betrayal was crushing, but life has a way of showing you who truly cares. My mom's parents, who had watched this whole saga unfold with quiet fury, stepped in when I least expected it. They had always been there for me, but I never realized just how closely they had been watching, how deeply they understood what was happening. My grandfather, a retired accountant who had always been careful with money, asked me to come over for Sunday dinner. As we sat in their familiar kitchen, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check that made my hands shake, $1 million. "Your mother knew something like this might happen," my grandmother explained, her voice tight with emotion. "She made us promise to keep this separate just in case." They had been investing and saving for years, building this safety net in secret. Mom had known, she had always known, that Dad might falter in his responsibilities. The money wasn't just financial security, it was vindication. It was proof that Mom's love extended beyond her death, that she had anticipated and planned for every possibility. I broke down crying right there at the kitchen table, overwhelmed by the depth of her foresight and my grandparents' devotion. But peace never lasts long in situations like these. Somehow, probably through Laura's gossip network, Dad found out about the money. His call came during dinner, his voice dripping with indignation. "How could you keep this from me?" he demanded. "From our family," the way he said "our family" made my blood boil. "Christine needs help with college too. You need to share this money. It's the right thing to do." I almost laughed at the absurdity. After taking my education fund, after giving away my mother's final gift, he had the audacity to demand more. "No," I said firmly, finding strength in my anger. "You've taken enough from me. This money is from Mom's parents, from Mom's planning. You have no right to it." "I'm still your father," he growled. "You're being selfish, just like—" He caught himself, but I knew what he was going to say, "just like your mother." The unspoken words hung between us. "My mother," I said quietly, "made sure I would be taken care of because she knew exactly what kind of man you really are. Keep the education fund you stole. Keep your new family. But this money, this stays with me." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking but my resolve firm. This money wasn't just cash in a bank account. It was my mother's last act of protection, her way of reaching through time to help me when I needed it most. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me, not even the man who used to be my father. Update 1. Hi there, it's been a couple of days since I last updated. A lot has happened since then. The aftermath of my refusal to share the money was like watching a storm gather. My dad's initial reaction, anger mixed with disbelief, quickly escalated into something uglier. He called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that oscillated between guilt-tripping and outright threats. "Your mother would be ashamed," he said in one message, his voice dripping with disappointment. "She raised you to be better than this." The irony of him invoking Mom's memory after everything he'd done was almost too much to bear. Each message felt like a fresh wound, reopening the pain of his betrayal. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. I found myself sitting in my grandparents' house. I moved in their house temporarily, late one night, staring at the check from my grandparents, wondering if I was being too harsh. Christine hadn't asked for any of this. She was just a kid who'd grown up without a father, who probably thought she'd finally found a complete family. Maybe I could spare some money, be a bigger person. But then I remembered everything. The hospital room where I sat alone for hours after my accident. The empty seats at my debate competitions. The way Dad's eyes would light up when Christine achieved something, while my accomplishments were met with distracted nods. The casual way he'd signed away my education fund, as if my mother's final gift meant nothing. The truth about their relationship came out in the most unexpected way. I went back to the house one afternoon to pick up some old photo albums I'd left behind. As I approached Dad's study, I heard raised voices through the half-open door. "This isn't right," Laura was saying, her voice tense. "Taking his money, his mother's money, to give to Christine? What were you thinking?" "I'm trying to make things right," Dad shot back. "She's my daughter, Laura, my daughter who I didn't know about for 17 years. Don't you understand? I have to make up for all that lost time." I felt my whole world tilt sideways. Without thinking, I pushed the door open. They both jumped, turning to stare at me with identical expressions of horror. "Dad," my voice sounded strange to my own ears. "What are you talking about? What do you mean your daughter?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dad sank into his leather chair, suddenly looking every one of his years. Laura wouldn't meet my eyes. "You might as well tell him," she finally said. "He deserves to know the truth." So they told me everything. About the night my parents had their biggest fight when I was still little. How Dad had stormed out and ended up at some bar downtown. How he and Laura, both drunk and miserable, had made a mistake that would change all our lives. Laura had discovered she was pregnant a few weeks later, but by then she'd already decided to leave town and raise the baby on her own. "I never told your father," Laura said quietly. "It was a one-time thing, and I didn't want to destroy your family." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on any of us. They ran into each other again at Sonny's diner a few months after Mom died. Dad was there drowning his sorrows in coffee. Laura was having her usual breakfast. When she heard about Mom's passing, she finally told him the truth about Christine. The marriage wasn't about love, it was about compensation. Every time he chose Christine over me, every time he poured resources and attention into her life while neglecting mine, he was trying to make up for years of absence. I was being sacrificed on the altar of his guilt. This revelation changed everything. The biological father, who had never contributed to Christine's education, wasn't some nameless ex of Laura's. It was my own father, who had neglected his existing son to compensate for his secret daughter. The hypocrisy was staggering. Armed with this information, I went to my grandparents. My grandfather, still furious about the trust fund, connected me with Harry, a ruthless trust and estate lawyer who had been his friend for decades. We sat in Harry's wood-paneled office as I laid out everything: the trust fund transfer, the history between Dad and Laura, the years of emotional manipulation. "Your mother's trust was ironclad," Harry said, reviewing the documents. "Your father had no right to transfer those assets without your consent, regardless of his intentions." He looked up at me, his eyes sharp. "We can not only recover the funds but also pursue damages for breach of fiduciary duty." The lawsuit hit my dad like a thunderbolt. I'll never forget his face when he was served with the papers at his office. According to his secretary, who later became one of our witnesses, he turned pale and had to sit down. Laura and Christine were served separately. We made sure to name them both as co-defendants to prevent any further transfer of the funds. The legal battle was brutal. Dad hired an aggressive defense team trying to argue that the transfer was in the spirit of my mother's wishes to provide for family. But Harry was better. He systematically dismantled their defense, presenting evidence of Dad's pattern of favoritism, the suspicious timing of the transfer, and most importantly, the clear language of my mother's trust. The smoking gun came from an unexpected source. My mother's old friend, who had been her confidant, came forward with emails from Mom expressing concern about Dad's reliability. "If anything happens to me," she had written, "make sure the trust stays protected. I love him, but I don't trust him with our son's future." Those emails, dated just months before her death, were devastating to Dad's case. The court proceedings were tense. Dad tried to paint me as a vindictive son, unwilling to share with his sister. But when our lawyer revealed the truth about Christine's parentage in open court, the judge's expression changed. The narrative shifted from a story about a selfish son to one about a father's betrayal and attempted cover-up. The judge's ruling was comprehensive. Not only did Dad have to repay the entire trust fund, but he also had to pay substantial interest and penalties. The judge was particularly harsh in his comments about Dad's breach of fiduciary duty, calling his actions a profound betrayal of both his late wife's wishes and his son's interests. Laura and Christine were in the courtroom when the verdict was read. Laura looked shell-shocked. Christine was crying. Part of me felt sorry for them. Their perfect family fantasy was crumbling around them. But then I remembered all the times I'd cried alone in my room, all the events they'd attended while I sat forgotten, all the love and attention that had been diverted from me to make up for Dad's guilty conscience. After the verdict, Dad tried to approach me outside the courthouse. "Son," he began, his voice breaking, "I never meant for any of this to happen. I was just trying to make things right." I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had checked under my bed for monsters, who had promised Mom he would always protect me, that man was gone. In his place was someone I barely recognized, someone who had allowed guilt and shame to corrupt every good thing we'd had. "You weren't trying to make things right," I told him quietly. "You were trying to make yourself feel better. There's a difference." I walked away then, leaving him standing on the courthouse steps. The money would be returned with interest, but some things couldn't be recovered. Trust, once broken, is like a shattered mirror. You can piece it back together, but you'll always see the cracks. The aftermath was complicated. Word spread through our extended family, creating rifts that would never fully heal. Some relatives sided with Dad, seeing me as the son who had publicly humiliated his father. Others understood and supported my actions. But most just stayed away, unwilling to take sides in such a messy family drama. My grandparents remained my rock through it all. "Your mother would be proud," my grandmother told me one evening as we sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Not just for standing up for yourself, but for refusing to let anyone diminish her last gift to you." The money was finally returned, with significant interest, but the real value wasn't in the dollars and cents. It was in the knowledge that I had fought for what was right, that I had honored my mother's memory, and that I had finally broken free from the web of guilt and manipulation that had entangled our family for so long. Update 2. Since that day, things have been a whirlwind. My grandparents have been my anchor through all of this, not just emotionally, but practically too. One evening, they brought up something I hadn't even considered. "You need professional help managing this money," my grandfather said. "Not because you're not capable, but because this is a significant sum and you need to make it work for your future." I was resistant at first. The money felt like Mom's last gift to me, and letting someone else handle it seemed wrong somehow. But my grandmother, with her usual wisdom, put it in perspective. "Your mother wanted this money to secure your future," she said. "Getting help to manage it properly is exactly what she would have wanted." They connected me with a financial advisor they'd known for years. He helped me create a solid investment strategy, setting aside money for my education while investing the rest for long-term growth. We meet monthly, going over everything in detail, making sure I understand every decision we make. I've been rebuilding my life piece by piece. I moved into a modest apartment near campus and threw myself into my studies. The financial security from Mom's money means I can focus on school without working 3 jobs, but I still keep my barista job at the local coffee shop. It keeps me grounded, and honestly, I like the routine of it. My grandparents come over for dinner once a week. We talk about Mom, share memories, and plan for the future. They've helped me see that family isn't about obligation or guilt. It's about love, support, and being there for each other no matter what. The hardest part has been accepting that my relationship with Dad is probably over for good. Sometimes I drive past our old house and see him playing basketball with Christine in the driveway or helping Laura with her garden. It hurts, but not like it used to. I'm learning that it's okay to let go of people who don't value you, even if they're family. Mom's money wasn't just financial security, it was freedom. Freedom to choose my own path, to build my own future, to be my own person. Sometimes I sit in my apartment late at night, looking at her picture, and I think she knew this would happen. She knew Dad might falter, and she made sure I would be okay anyway. That's the kind of love that lasts, the kind that plans ahead, that protects, that gives you the strength to stand on your own. And while I lost my dad in this process, I gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I can survive anything, and the certainty that I don't have to compromise my self-worth for anyone, not even family.